And it would seem that some kind of political education is pretty essential if you want to make sure that the adults coming out of education have the facilities to make sure they're not being exploited or lorded over or oppressed. It also makes you appreciate the rights and the freedoms that you have as well. If you know your economics and your history, you know that a lot of the freedoms and rights, things like workers' rights and women's rights and LGBT rights, had to be fought for and may even have to be defended, and that sort of thing isn't really taught so much. It seems like there's a disposition that you get given as a result of the public education system towards passive citizenship. I'm not saying that's deliberately there, but it is kind of there. If you were to look at the state of the education system today, both in high school and probably to a greater extent in universities, and look at how they are run, you might be forgiven for supposing that the purpose of the Institute of Education is to prepare people to enter a capitalist workforce, to prepare people to work for wages and to make profit for somebody else, rather than to be happy functioning human beings or to be political leaders or artists or revolutionaries or anything else. Big surprise, I guess, that education organised by the ruling class will act in the interests of the ruling class. Interestingly, anarchists and the modern school movement noticed this as well. There's a great article by David Gribble, which I also provide the details for down in the description, which goes into the ways that anarchists and various other political radicals have set up their own very different kinds of schools, like schools where the pupils run the timetable and so on. So I recommend checking that out too. It's also worth noting that if your view of education is just this is how we train people to work, then you're kind of, well, it's unavoidably ableist, because there are plenty of people who might, well, get plenty of benefit out of education and might love to be educated, but who cannot work. Now, people might say that certain things are prioritized above others because certain jobs are prioritized above others. Like, society needs more engineers than it needs ballet dancers, so of course we prioritize the things that people need for engineering. But if you make that argument, you're appealing to the idea that society as it is the way it should be, which is not necessarily true. I mean, yes, in our society we do prioritize engineers above ballet dancers, but it's a pretty crude example and maybe it wouldn't work with that one, but is not necessarily the way things should be. My point is, you can't appeal to the way things are as if that alone settles the question of how they should be. What you think the good of education is will also have a big impact on who you think it's okay to include in your education systems. So you might be aware that right now in the UK there's a lot of xenophobia and anti-migrant sentiment. In particular, there's a big stink being kicked up about parents who've been asked to show the school their child's passport in order to prove that the child is British. And if you think that the purpose of education is just to prepare people to enter a capitalist workforce, then maybe it does make sense to double check that the people who you are spending time training can in fact legally work in the country. But if on the other hand you think that the good of education is to be measured in the benefit it brings to the person being educated, rather than the person for whom they might eventually work, then you might have a more inclusive view of education. You might say, well, we want everybody to come in as far as is possible and be educated and accrue these benefits of just having knowledge. And you might even do something really, really out there, like, I don't know, give away free education on YouTube. And you might well come back and say, well, Ollie, viewing education as something that's good in itself and that, it's not all about the money, is a very privileged position. And if you are in a group where it's actually really bloody difficult to find a job and really bloody difficult to survive, as for a lot of people it is, you do have to focus a bit more on the education and kind of the practical use of the degree and the education. And yeah, fair enough, that's a fair point. I don't think that completely invalidates the discussion. In fact, I think it adds to it, because again, you're kind of appealing to the way things are, which doesn't settle the question of how they should be. But yeah, that's a fair point. This is something I'm generally not sure about the answer to, and I'm looking forward to reading your comments on it. But maybe I'm just reading too much into it. Or am I?